Awakening is not becoming someone new, it's returning to who you are. Why is it that after reading so many books, watching so many videos, attending so many workshops, and doing so much inner work, you still feel like something is missing? Why does there remain a quiet sense that you are not quite there yet, not fully healed, not awakened enough? That question lives silently in many people's hearts. It is rarely spoken out loud, yet it shapes so much of the spiritual journey. And if you are honest with yourself, you may have felt it too, that subtle pressure to become better, lighter, wiser, more elevated than who you are right now. For a long time, we have been taught to think of awakening as a kind of upgrade, as if there is a higher version of you waiting somewhere in the future, and your task is to work hard enough, think positively enough, heal deeply enough to finally reach it. We imagine awakening as climbing a mountain, step by step, discipline by discipline, until one day we stand at the peak and can finally say, "Now I am enough." But what if that entire picture is upside down? What if awakening is not about becoming someone new at all? What if it is about remembering who you were before you learned to believe you were not enough? Many people unknowingly bring the same mindset they used to survive the world into their spiritual journey. The mindset that says, "I must fix myself." The mindset that says, "I must improve." The mindset that says, "I am not there yet." And so, even spirituality becomes another project, another responsibility, another quiet burden carried on the shoulders of the soul. This is where a deep misunderstanding begins. Awakening does not happen by adding more layers to yourself. It happens by gently removing the ones that never belonged to you in the first place. It is not about constructing a new identity called the awakened self. It is about allowing the false identities to fall away, one by one, like old coats you no longer need to wear. You are not broken. You have never been broken. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with you that needs to be repaired. What you are experiencing is not a flaw in your being, but a forgetting of your essence. Like a musician who has forgotten the sound of their own instrument. You are not missing anything, you are simply out of tune with what has always been there. From the moment you were born, you were whole. Before the world told you who to be. Before you learned which parts of yourself were acceptable and which were not. Before you learned to perform, to protect, to please, to hide. Beneath all of that conditioning, something quiet and steady has always remained untouched. That is who you are returning to. Awakening is not a journey outward, it is a journey inward. And more precisely, it is not even a journey, it is a soft turning of attention back toward what has never left you. Imagine a river that has spent years trying to flow uphill, pushing against gravity, exhausting itself in the struggle. One day, it stops fighting, it relaxes, and in that surrender, it naturally begins to flow in the direction it was always meant to go. Nothing new is added to the river. No special technique is required. It simply returns to its nature. This is how awakening unfolds. The moment you stop forcing yourself to become something, you create space for truth to reveal itself. The moment you stop trying to reach a higher state, you begin to feel the quiet depth of the present one. Awareness does not expand through effort. It expands through permission. Modern science, especially in the language of energy and quantum understanding, points to this same truth. Reality does not respond to struggle. It responds to state, not what you do, but how you are being. Not what you demand from life, but what you allow within yourself. When you are constantly striving to improve yourself, there is an underlying message being sent to your nervous system and your energy field. I am not okay as I am. And life, in its perfect mirror-like nature, reflects that belief back to you. But when you rest into acceptance, not passive resignation, but deep presence, something shifts. The field around you reorganizes. Your inner world softens. Your breath deepens. And without effort, clarity begins to arise. This is why so many people feel exhausted on their spiritual path. They are trying to awaken using the same tools they used to survive control, discipline, self-criticism, constant analysis. But awakening asks for something radically different. It asks for trust. It asks for stillness. It asks for the courage to stop running. You do not awaken by chasing light. You awaken by turning toward what you have been avoiding. When you sit quietly with yourself without judgment, Without an agenda, you may begin to notice something subtle, a sense of being that is already complete, a quiet awareness that does not need validation, a presence that exists even when thoughts come and go. That presence is not new, it is ancient. It has been with you in every phase of your life, in moments of joy, in moments of confusion, in moments of deep pain. It watched you learn who to be, and now it is patiently waiting for you to remember. This remembering does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives like a sigh of relief, like setting down a heavy bag you did not realize you were carrying, like coming home after a long journey and realizing the door was never locked. You may notice that you react less, that silence feels less uncomfortable, that you no longer need to explain yourself so much. These are not signs that you are becoming someone special. They are signs that you are becoming more real. Awakening strips away the unnecessary effort of pretending. It dissolves the constant inner commentary that tells you who you should be. And in that simplicity, life begins to feel more intimate, more alive, more honest. You do not need to reach for awakening. You need to stop pushing it away. As this video continues, we will explore what it truly means to return to yourself, not through struggle, but through awareness, not through control, but through surrender. Not by becoming someone new, but by remembering who you have always been. And perhaps, for the first time in a long while, you will realize that you are not behind. You are not late. You are not lacking. You are already standing at the doorway. All that remains is to step inside. 1. The greatest misunderstanding about awakening. In the modern spiritual world, something very subtle has happened. Something that looks harmless on the surface, but quietly shapes how people relate to themselves every single day. Awakening has slowly been turned into a standard to live up to, a direction you are supposed to move toward, an invisible ladder you are expected to climb. Without realizing it, many sincere seekers wake up each morning with the silent pressure that they should be more conscious, more peaceful, more evolved than they were yesterday. And that pressure alone already pulls them away from the very presence they are seeking. This is how the idea of higher vibration becomes misunderstood. What began as a gentle pointer toward awareness slowly turns into a demand placed upon the self. People start measuring their worth by how calm they appear, how positive their thoughts sound, how spiritual their language becomes. And in doing so, they unknowingly replace one form of self-judgment with another that looks more refined, more acceptable, but is no less heavy to carry. The heart may still feel tired, yet the mind insists it should be lighter by now. From there, comparison quietly enters the picture. You may notice it when you scroll through spiritual content, listen to teachers, or hear others speak confidently about their awakening experiences. A voice inside begins to whisper that others seem further along, more awakened, more aligned than you. You may start wondering why your own journey feels slower, messier, less graceful. That comparison does not shout. It simply lingers, creating the sense that something about your process is lacking. Over time, that quiet comparison grows into a deeper feeling that is rarely acknowledged out loud. The feeling that you are still not awake enough. Even after years of inner work, meditation, prayer, reflection, and healing, there remains a subtle dissatisfaction, a sense that you have not yet crossed some invisible line. This feeling does not come from truth. It comes from the belief that awakening is a destination rather than a recognition. And that belief alone can keep a person endlessly searching for what is already present. At this stage, something even more refined appears, something many people do not recognize at first: the spiritual version of the ego. It does not announce itself loudly or aggressively. It wears the language of awareness, compassion, and understanding. It may say things like, "I should be beyond this by now," or "A truly awakened person would not feel this way." It judges not only your struggles, but even your humanity, and it does so in the name of growth. This spiritual ego is far more convincing than the old one, because it feels meaningful, it feels responsible, it feels noble, but it is still rooted in the same assumption that there is something wrong with you in this moment, and that awakening will fix it. It subtly divides your experience into acceptable and unacceptable parts, into enlightened states you want to keep, and human moments you feel you should transcend. And the more you try to escape those human moments, the more fragmented you feel inside. I know this terrain well, not from theory, but from living it. There was a time when I believed that every uncomfortable emotion meant I was doing something wrong on my path. When sadness appeared, I tried to rise above it. When fear surfaced, I questioned my level of awareness. When exhaustion came, I interpreted it as resistance. I did not realize that I was fighting life itself, while calling that fight awakening. The truth revealed itself slowly, not through effort, but through fatigue. There comes a moment when striving collapses under its own weight, when the soul grows tired of trying to perfect itself, when you finally admit, perhaps quietly, that something about this path has begun to feel heavy instead of liberating. And in that honest admission, something real begins to surface. Awakening, in its essence, does not create a new identity. It does not crown you as someone special or separate. It does not lift you above your humanity. If anything, it brings you back into it more fully, more tenderly, more honestly. Awakening does not say, become better. It says, stop pretending you are not already whole. When you truly see this, comparison loses its grip. You stop measuring your inner life against someone else's outer expression. You realize that no two awakenings look the same, because no two nervous systems, histories, or hearts are the same. Awakening is not a performance. It is an intimacy with your own experience, exactly as it is. The pressure to maintain a high vibration begins to soften when you understand that awareness does not disappear in difficult moments. Presence is not something you lose when you feel anger, grief, or confusion. In fact, those moments often invite the deepest awareness, if you allow them. Awakening is not the absence of darkness. It is the capacity to remain present within it, without abandoning yourself. This is where the misunderstanding finally dissolves. Awakening is not a state you achieve and then maintain through discipline. It is a recognition that awareness is already here, even when life feels messy, uncertain, or unresolved. It is the realization that nothing needs to be excluded for truth to be present. Your doubts, your fatigue, your longing, and your unanswered questions are not obstacles on the path. They are part of the path itself. When this understanding settles, something profound happens. The inner battle quiets. You stop monitoring yourself so closely. You stop asking whether you are doing awakening correctly. There is a gentle relief in realizing that you do not need to become anyone else in order to be at peace. Peace begins to emerge when the fight to improve your being finally ends. From this place, spirituality becomes simpler and more honest. It is no longer about maintaining an image or chasing an experience. It becomes about listening deeply to what is actually happening within you, moment by moment. It becomes about allowing your life to be a teacher, rather than a problem to solve. And perhaps the most liberating truth of all is this: awakening does not move you away from yourself. It brings you closer. It does not demand that you rise above your humanity. It invites you to inhabit it fully, with awareness, kindness, and humility. When this is understood, the path no longer feels like a burden. It feels like a quiet unfolding, guided not by effort, but by truth gently remembering itself through you. 2. You have never lost your true nature. There is something deeply comforting, almost disarming, about this truth, when you finally allow it to land in your body rather than just your mind. You have never lost your true nature. Not once. Not during your most confused years. Not during your darkest moments. Not even when you felt farthest from yourself. From the very beginning of your life, before language shaped your thoughts, and before the world taught you how to see yourself, you were already complete awareness, quietly present and whole. When a child is born, there is no sense of deficiency in them. There is no belief that they need to become something else in order to deserve love or belonging. There is simply being, breath moving in and out, eyes meeting the world with curiosity, emotions flowing freely without explanation or apology. That state was not naive, and it was not something you grew out of. It was your original condition, and it never disappeared. It was only covered over, layer by layer, by what you had to learn in order to survive. No soul enters this world broken. That idea alone has caused more suffering than most people realize. We grow up in systems that are well-intentioned but deeply conditional, environments that reward certain behaviors and quietly discourage others. Over time, we begin to believe that something about us must be adjusted, corrected, or improved in order to be acceptable. And so the belief takes root that we are flawed in some essential way, that we need fixing, that healing is about repairing a damaged core, but there is no damaged core. What feels damaged is the nervous system that learned to stay alert. What feels wounded is the heart that learned to protect itself. What feels fragmented is the mind that learned to divide experience into what is allowed and what is not. None of this speaks to who you are. It speaks only to what you learned. Fear is not your nature. Fear is a response that was learned through repetition and experience. You learned fear by watching, by listening, by adapting. You learned it when safety felt uncertain, when love felt conditional, when being yourself carried a cost. Fear became a strategy, a way to stay connected, a way to belong. But strategies are not identities, and adaptations are not essence. This distinction changes everything. When you believe fear is who you are, you fight it endlessly. You try to transcend it, suppress it, outgrow it, or replace it with something more spiritual. But when you see fear for what it truly is, a learned response layered on top of awareness, the relationship changes. You no longer need to battle it. You can meet it. And in that meeting, it begins to loosen its grip. Your true nature has always remained quietly present behind every role you have played, behind the role of the responsible one, behind the role of the strong one, behind the role of the one who holds everything together, even behind the role of the seeker, who is always trying to understand and improve. Roles are necessary in life, but they are not who you are. They are garments you put on in response to circumstances, and like all garments, they can be set down. I remember a time when I truly believed that if I stripped away all my roles, there would be nothing left. That fear is more common than people admit. We hold on to our identities because we think they are holding us together. But what I discovered, slowly and gently, was the opposite. When the roles softened, what remained was not emptiness, but presence. A quiet, stable sense of being that did not depend on performance or explanation. This presence does not announce itself dramatically. It does not demand recognition. It simply is. It watches thoughts arise and fall. It feels emotions without being consumed by them. It remains even when the story of who you think you are begins to dissolve. This is why awakening often feels less like an explosion and more like a remembering, a subtle shift from identification to awareness. The metaphor of the sky and the clouds is not poetic decoration. It is an accurate description of your inner life. The sky does not fight the clouds. It does not try to clear them away. It does not identify itself as cloudy. It simply allows weather to pass through. In the same way, your true nature has never been altered by the thoughts, emotions, or experiences that have moved through your life. There were moments when your inner world was stormy. There were seasons of grief, anger, confusion, and deep exhaustion. Those moments may have shaped you, but they did not define you. They passed through awareness, and awareness remained. It always has. One of the quiet tragedies of the spiritual journey is how easily people overlook this simple truth. They search endlessly for something they believe they have lost, not realizing they are searching from the very place they seek. Awareness is not an object to be found. It is the field in which all seeking happens. When you truly see this, healing begins to feel less like effort and more like permission. You stop trying to fix yourself and start allowing yourself to be seen, even by your own awareness. The body relaxes when it realizes it is not being evaluated. The mind softens when it no longer has to solve itself. The heart opens when it is not required to justify its existence. This does not mean pain disappears. It means pain is no longer interpreted as evidence of failure. Sadness can arise without meaning something has gone wrong. Fear can appear without signaling danger. Confusion can exist without demanding immediate resolution. Life becomes more spacious when you stop demanding that it be different in order for you to be okay. There is a profound dignity in recognizing that your essence has never been compromised. It restores a sense of trust, not only in yourself, but in life itself. You begin to see that much of what you called healing was actually unlearning. Unlearning the belief that you are incomplete. unlearning the habit of self-rejection, unlearning the impulse to constantly reach beyond the present moment in search of validation. As this unlearning deepens, something very gentle happens. You begin to meet yourself with kindness instead of correction. You listen more than you analyze. You feel more than you explain. And in that simplicity, the natural intelligence of awareness begins to guide you in ways that effort never could. Your true nature does not need protection. It does not need improvement. It does not need to be proven. It only needs to be recognized. And recognition does not come through striving. It comes through stillness, through honesty, through the willingness to stop running from what is already here. This is why awakening feels, at its core, like coming home, not to a place you have never been, but to a presence that has quietly waited for you through every chapter of your life. The moment you stop trying to become someone else, you may feel it, a subtle sense of relief, a softening in the chest, a recognition that nothing essential was ever missing. You were never lost. You were never broken. You were never separate from what you are seeking. Like the sky that remains untouched by passing clouds, your true nature has been here all along, holding everything, asking nothing, waiting patiently for you to remember. 3. How the ego is formed. The ego does not appear all at once, and it is not something you consciously decide to create. It is formed slowly, quietly, through repetition and necessity, through moments where you learned how to adapt in order to belong. At its core, the ego is not an enemy, and it is not a mistake. It is a structure that developed to help you navigate a world that did not always feel safe, predictable, or welcoming to your full expression. The building blocks of the ego are memory, belief, and conditioning. Every experience you have ever had leaves an imprint, not just in your mind, but in your body and nervous system. Moments of praise teach you what is acceptable. Moments of rejection teach you what to hide. Over time, these experiences solidify into beliefs about who you are, what you deserve, and how you must behave in order to stay connected to others. None of this happens because something is wrong with you. It happens because you are human. From a very early age, family plays a powerful role in shaping this structure. Families do their best with what they know, but they also carry their own unresolved fears and expectations. You may have learned that love was given more easily when you were quiet, helpful, successful, or agreeable. You may have learned that certain emotions made others uncomfortable, and so you learned to contain them. These lessons were not spoken directly, yet they were absorbed deeply, shaping the way you related to yourself long before you had words for it. Society then reinforces these patterns. Cultural values reward productivity, independence, and control, often at the expense of vulnerability and rest. You are taught, sometimes subtly and sometimes directly, that your worth is tied to what you contribute, how you appear, and how well you perform your role. School systems reward compliance and comparison. Religious structures may introduce ideas of being worthy or unworthy, saved or lacking. None of these systems are inherently malicious, but together they form a powerful web of conditioning that teaches you how to see yourself through external standards. Within this web, you learn something crucial, that being yourself without adjustment may carry a cost. And so, without realizing it, you begin to shape yourself into someone who can be accepted. You become someone reliable, someone strong, someone successful, someone spiritual, someone who knows. Each identity serves a purpose, helping you move through life with a sense of direction and safety. But each identity also comes with a subtle tension, because it must be maintained. This is where the ego truly takes form, in the effort to remain acceptable. The ego is not arrogance. It is not selfishness. It is the fear of being excluded, refined into a personality. It is the part of you that learned how to read the room, how to anticipate expectations, how to adjust your expression in order to stay connected. At its core, the ego is born from the fear of rejection, not because you are weak, but because connection matters deeply to you. I came to understand this not through theory, but through years of watching my own patterns repeat. I noticed how quickly I shifted my tone depending on who I was with, how often I filtered my truth to avoid discomfort, how easily I measured my value by the responses I received. I believed these habits were simply who I was. It never occurred to me that they were learned strategies, carefully built over time to protect something tender inside. The ego feels solid because it is familiar. You have rehearsed it for decades. Its thoughts feel like your thoughts. Its fears feel personal. Its judgments feel logical. And because it has helped you survive, it demands loyalty. When questioned, it responds with anxiety, defensiveness, or control. It warns you that without it, you will fall apart, be exposed, or lose your place in the world. But here is the quiet truth that changes everything. The ego is an activity, not an identity. It is something that happens, not something you are. It arises in response to perceived threat, and it dissolves when safety is felt. This is why moments of deep presence, love, or stillness often feel ego-free, not because the ego has been destroyed, but because it is no longer needed in that moment. When you begin to observe the ego rather than identify with it, a small gap appears. You notice thoughts arising that defend, compare, or justify, and yet something in you is watching them. That watcher is not anxious. It is not trying to improve itself. It is simply aware. This awareness was present before the ego formed, and it remains present even now. The ego tells a story about who you are, based on the past and projected into the future. Awareness exists before the story, during the story, and after the story. The ego depends on time. Awareness does not. This is why awakening is not about getting rid of the ego, but about seeing it clearly for what it is, a functional tool that was mistaken for the self. When the ego is misunderstood, it becomes rigid. It tries to control outcomes. It resists uncertainty. It fears dissolution. But when it is seen with compassion, it begins to soften. You realize that much of what you called your personality was actually protection. Much of what you called ambition was actually fear of being unseen. Much of what you called discipline was actually a strategy to avoid rejection. This realization does not make you passive or detached from life. It makes you honest. It allows you to respond rather than react. It allows you to choose presence over habit. Slowly, the grip of the ego loosens, not because you fight it, but because you no longer believe it is who you are. There is a tenderness that emerges when you see this clearly. You stop judging yourself so harshly. You stop demanding perfection. You begin to understand why you became the way you did. And in that understanding, forgiveness naturally arises, not as a moral act, but as a recognition that you were always doing the best you could with the awareness you had. The ego does not disappear overnight. It continues to arise, especially in moments of stress or uncertainty. But now, it arises within awareness, rather than replacing it. You may still feel fear, but you are no longer consumed by it. You may still hear the old stories, but they no longer define you. There is a growing sense of space around your experience, and in that space, choice becomes possible. The most liberating insight of all is this: the ego was never the problem. The problem was believing it was you. Once that belief dissolves, even slightly, a deeper intelligence begins to guide your life. An intelligence that does not rely on control, comparison, or approval. An intelligence rooted in presence, simplicity, and trust. And so, the journey continues, not toward a perfected self, but toward a more honest relationship with what is already here. The ego relaxes when it realizes it is not being threatened. Awareness deepens when it is no longer overlooked, and life begins to feel less like a performance and more like a quiet unfolding, guided by something older, wiser, and far more gentle than the self you thought you had to become. 4. Awakening is a process of remembering, not learning more. There comes a point on the inner path when knowledge no longer brings relief. You may notice that you already understand many concepts, that you can explain awareness, presence, ego, and healing with clarity, and yet something in your lived experience still feels restless. The mind may be well informed, but the heart remains tired. This is usually the moment when awakening begins to shift direction, not forward, but inward. For a long time, we are conditioned to believe that growth happens through accumulation. We learn more, practice more, refine more. This works in many areas of life, but it quietly fails when applied to awareness itself. Awareness does not deepen by being filled. It deepens by being uncovered. And uncovering does not happen through effort, but through stillness. Silence is often misunderstood as the absence of sound or activity. But the silence that reveals truth is not something you create by force. It is what remains when you stop chasing the next insight. When you allow the nervous system to settle, when you no longer demand that the present moment deliver something extraordinary. In that silence, something essential begins to speak, not in words, but in felt knowing. I remember clearly when I reached the limit of learning. There were shelves of books, hours of teachings, countless explanations stored in the mind. And yet, in quiet moments, there was a sense of distance from myself, as if all that understanding had placed me one step away from direct experience. It was only when I stopped trying to understand awakening that I began to recognize it. Truth does not announce itself loudly. It does not compete for attention. It waits patiently for you to become quiet enough to notice. In the space where analysis softens and seeking pauses, awareness naturally reveals itself, not as an idea, but as presence. This presence does not need to be improved. It does not need to be refined. It simply needs to be acknowledged. Consciousness does not require effort to exist. It was present before you learned how to think. It remains present even when thinking stops. Effort belongs to the mind, not to awareness. And the more you try to grasp awareness with the mind, the more it seems to slip away. Not because it is elusive, but because you are looking in the wrong direction. When you finally stop searching, something very subtle changes. The constant orientation toward the future dissolves. The idea that something essential is missing loosens its grip. You begin to notice what has always been here. The simple fact of being. Breathing happens. Sensations arise. Thoughts pass through, and all of it unfolds within a quiet witnessing that does not comment or interfere. This is the moment of remembering. You remember what it feels like to be yourself before effort took over, before self-improvement became a requirement, before identity became something you had to manage. There is a softness in this remembering, a sense of familiarity that does not depend on memory. It feels less like discovery and more like recognition, as if something deeply known has been gently brought back into view. In this remembering, the body begins to relax in a way it may not have for years. Muscles soften, breath deepens. The constant background tension that came from trying to be someone eases. You realize that much of your exhaustion was not physical or emotional, but existential. The fatigue of constantly orienting yourself toward a future version of who you thought you needed to become. Silence plays a crucial role here. Not as an escape from life, but as a doorway into it. In silence, you meet yourself without the usual filters. You begin to feel rather than interpret. You notice how often the mind rushes to label experience instead of allowing it. And gradually, you see that awareness itself is never rushed. It is always here, patient, steady, and open. This does not mean you withdraw from the world or stop learning altogether. It means learning takes its rightful place. Knowledge becomes a tool rather than a crutch. Insight becomes supportive rather than central. The center shifts from accumulation to presence, from doing to being, from seeking to allowing. There is a quiet courage required to stop seeking. Seeking feels active. It gives the ego a role. It creates the illusion of progress. Stopping, on the other hand, can feel like standing still in unfamiliar territory. But it is only in this stillness that you realize you were never lost. You were simply looking away from what was already here. As this understanding deepens, you may notice that moments of ordinary life become more vivid. A cup of tea, the sound of wind, the weight of your body resting in a chair. These moments no longer feel like distractions from awakening. They feel like expressions of it. Awareness is no longer something you visit in meditation and leave behind in daily life. It becomes the ground of your experience. Remembering yourself does not remove complexity from life. It changes your relationship to it. Challenges still arise. Emotions still move through. Decisions still need to be made, but they are met from a place of presence rather than urgency. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of anticipate. Life begins to feel less like a problem to solve and more like a process to participate in. There is a profound humility in this stage of awakening. You realize how much effort was unnecessary, how much striving was fueled by misunderstanding, how often you tried to become what you already were. And in that realization, compassion naturally arises, not only for yourself, but for everyone still caught in the effort to arrive somewhere else. The simplicity of this truth is what makes it so easily overlooked. The mind expects awakening to be complex, dramatic, transformative in obvious ways. But what it offers instead is something quieter and more enduring, a stable sense of being that does not depend on conditions, a grounded awareness that remains even when life feels uncertain. When you stop seeking, you begin to see. When you stop adding, you begin to remember. When effort relaxes, presence reveals itself. And in that revelation, you discover that you never needed to become someone else in order to awaken. You only needed to return to the simple, undeniable fact of being here. This is not a new achievement. It is an old truth, finally remembered. And as this remembering settles into your life, awakening no longer feels like a task you must complete. It feels like a quiet companionship with yourself, one that does not demand perfection, only honesty, one that does not promise escape from life, but offers a deeper intimacy with it, rooted in the simple, steady awareness that has been with you from the very beginning. 5. Letting go of effort is the greatest turning point. There is a moment on the inner path that often arrives quietly, almost unnoticed at first, when you realize that all the effort you have been making to become more awake has begun to feel heavy rather than liberating. What once felt purposeful now feels tense. What once felt like devotion now feels like pressure. This moment is not a failure. It is a threshold. It is the beginning of a deeper understanding that effort, when directed at being, can become the very thing that keeps you from resting into it. Many people approach awakening with the same mindset they use to improve their lives in the outer world. They push, discipline, refine, and correct themselves in the hope of reaching a higher state. They monitor their thoughts, manage their emotions, and evaluate their progress, believing that consistent effort will eventually lead to freedom. But awareness does not respond to force. It responds to openness. And when effort becomes compulsive, it creates resistance, not clarity. Trying to make yourself more spiritual is still an act of control. Even when the intention is sincere, the underlying message remains that who you are right now is not enough. This message is felt deeply by the nervous system. It creates tension in the body, urgency in the mind, and a subtle sense of conflict within the heart. The more you push yourself to rise above your experience, the more your experience pushes back. Resistance is not always loud. Often, it appears as fatigue, frustration, or a vague sense of stagnation. You may find yourself doing all the right practices, yet feeling strangely disconnected. You may notice that your body feels tight even when your mind speaks the language of peace. This is because resistance is not a mental issue. It is an energetic one. When you oppose what is present, energy constricts. Flow is interrupted. Life no longer moves through you freely. I learned this not through insight, but through exhaustion. There was a time when I believed that healing required constant effort, constant vigilance, constant self-correction. I believed that if I relaxed, I would fall backward. I believed that letting go meant giving up. But eventually, the body spoke louder than the mind. It asked for rest, not as an escape, but as a necessity. And in that rest, something unexpected happened. When I stopped trying to heal, healing began. This is not as paradoxical as it sounds. Healing does not occur through pressure. It occurs through safety. And safety is created not by control, but by permission. When you allow yourself to feel what is here without trying to change it, the body receives a powerful signal that it is no longer under threat. The nervous system begins to regulate. Energy that was bound in defense becomes available for integration. Allowing is not passive resignation. It is an active openness to experience. It is the willingness to stay present with what arises without immediately trying to fix it. In this space of allowing, awareness naturally expands. You do not have to push it open. It opens because nothing is being held shut. High vibration is often misunderstood as constant positivity or emotional elevation. In truth, vibration rises when resistance falls. When energy is no longer fighting itself, it begins to move freely. Sadness can be present without collapse. Fear can arise without control. Joy can appear without attachment. All of these states are held within a wider field of awareness that is stable and grounded. Letting go of effort does not mean abandoning discernment or responsibility. It means releasing the belief that force creates freedom. It means trusting the intelligence of awareness to unfold at its own pace. This trust is not naive. It is born from seeing, again and again, that struggle only tightens the knot you are trying to untie. There is a softness that emerges when you stop battling your inner life. You begin to listen rather than evaluate. You feel rather than analyze. You allow emotions to complete their natural movement, instead of freezing them midstream. Like a river that no longer pushes against its banks, energy begins to flow in ways that feel natural and sustainable. This softness is often mistaken for weakness. In a culture that values effort and achievement, surrender can seem irresponsible. But true surrender is not collapse. It is alignment. It is the recognition that life moves more intelligently when you stop trying to control its every turn. Awareness does not expand through confrontation. It expands through inclusion. When you allow yourself to be exactly where you are, without agenda, something remarkable happens. The inner tension that came from trying to become dissolves. In its place, there is a quiet alertness, a gentle curiosity, a sense of being at home in your own experience. This is not a peak state. It is a grounded one. It can be lived from day to day, moment to moment. As effort relaxes, you may notice that insight arises spontaneously, not as a result of concentration, but as a natural clarity. You may find that old patterns lose their grip without struggle. You may discover that compassion arises without intention. These are not accomplishments. They are consequences of alignment. The expansion of awareness through softness is one of the most misunderstood aspects of awakening. We are taught that growth requires friction, that transformation demands intensity, but inner growth follows a different logic. It unfolds when conditions are supportive. It deepens when pressure is removed. It reveals itself when you stop demanding that it appear. This does not mean that pain disappears from life. It means pain is met differently. It is allowed to move, to inform, to release. Without resistance, even difficult experiences become gateways rather than obstacles. They pass through awareness and leave behind understanding, not scars. The greatest turning point on the path is realizing that you do not have to force your way into freedom. Freedom arises when the force ends, when effort relaxes into presence, when control gives way to trust, when the body and mind are allowed to settle into what is already here. Awakening becomes less of a struggle and more of a return. In letting go of effort, you do not lose direction. You find it. You align with a deeper intelligence that does not rush, does not judge, and does not demand proof. An intelligence that knows how to heal, how to integrate, how to awaken, without violence or urgency. This is the quiet power of allowing, not dramatic, not performative, but deeply real. And when you finally experience this shift, you understand something that cannot be taught, only lived. That awareness was never waiting for you to try harder. It was waiting for you to stop. 6. The scientific perspective on energy and quantum awareness. From a scientific point of view, especially when we look through the lens of modern physics and energy science, reality does not respond to force, pressure, or constant mental effort, but instead reflects the state of being from which we are living, often in ways that are subtle, delayed, and deeply intelligent. The field around you, whether we call it an energy field, a quantum field, or simply the fabric of reality, is not listening to what you repeat with strained positivity, but to the quality of presence you embody when no one is watching and nothing needs to be proven. In quantum physics, the observer is not separate from what is observed, which quietly dismantles the old belief that the world exists independently of our inner state, because the act of observation itself influences outcome, not through intention alone, but through coherence, attention, and the level of internal noise or stillness we bring into the moment. When the mind is tense, divided, or attempting to manipulate reality into a preferred shape, the field receives contradiction rather than clarity, and contradiction creates delay, friction, and confusion rather than flow. Energy does not respond well to coercion, because coercion implies resistance, and resistance is already a state of inner conflict, which means the signal being sent is mixed and unstable, much like static interrupting a clear broadcast. This is why forced positive thinking often leads to exhaustion instead of transformation. Because beneath the surface of affirmations, there is still a subtle message of not being enough, of needing to change in order to deserve peace. And the field responds to that deeper assumption rather than the surface-level words. When scientists speak of frequency or vibration, they are not describing something mystical or abstract, but the measurable coherence or incoherence within a system, and a human being is a living system whose emotional state, nervous system regulation, and level of presence directly affect how energy moves through the body and interacts with the environment. A calm, regulated system emits a stable signal, while an anxious or over-efforting system emits fragmentation. And the world reflects that fragmentation back in the form of resistance, delays, and repeated challenges. Raising frequency, in this sense, is not about forcing joy or denying pain, but about returning the system to its natural state of balance, much like a body heals more effectively when it is not under constant stress. When you stop fighting your inner experience and allow sensations, emotions, and thoughts to arise, without labeling them as problems, the nervous system begins to soften, coherence naturally increases, and the signal you send into the field becomes clearer without effort. Quantum science also reminds us that potential exists before form, meaning reality is not fixed, but responsive, and what collapses potential into experience is not desire alone, but the quality of attention and presence you bring to this moment. When attention is scattered across regret and anticipation, the signal is weak. But when attention rests fully in the now, without trying to improve it, the signal becomes strong, stable, and quietly magnetic. The paradox is that the more present you are, the less you feel the need to change anything. And yet this very absence of struggle allows change to occur organically, because the field is no longer being interfered with by fear-based intention. Presence is not passive, as many misunderstand, but deeply active in a non-doing way, like gravity quietly shaping the movement of planets without effort or force. From an energetic standpoint, allowing is not resignation but alignment, because when you allow what is, you remove internal contradiction, and coherence returns to the system naturally. This coherence is what many spiritual traditions pointed to long before science had the language to describe it, and now physics is slowly catching up to what mystics sensed through direct experience rather than equations. The observer effect teaches us that how you look at your life matters more than what you are trying to get from it, because perception itself is participatory. When you look at your experience with judgment, impatience, or self-correction, you are reinforcing separation. But when you look with openness and curiosity, even toward discomfort, the system relaxes, and reality responds with unexpected adjustments that feel almost intelligent in their timing. Living in presence does not mean abandoning goals or responsibilities, but it changes the inner posture from pushing to participating, from forcing to listening, and from controlling to cooperating with life. In this state, actions arise from clarity rather than compulsion, and effort becomes efficient rather than exhausting, because it is no longer driven by fear of not being enough. When you are present, the body knows how to regulate itself, the mind becomes less reactive, and emotions move through rather than getting stuck, which creates an internal environment where energy flows freely. In such an environment, the field responds with synchrony rather than resistance, not because you demanded it, but because you stopped interfering with the natural order of things. This is why true awakening feels simpler rather than more complex, quieter rather than more dramatic, and more grounded rather than elevated, because it is not about escaping the human experience but inhabiting it fully without distortion. Science does not contradict this understanding. It quietly supports it by showing us again and again that systems function best when they are coherent, present, and free from unnecessary tension. When you live from presence, reality does not need to be convinced, persuaded, or corrected, because it is already in conversation with you at every moment, responding faithfully to your state of being rather than your strategies. And when you finally see this, not as an idea but as a lived truth, the struggle to become someone dissolves, And what remains is a gentle participation in life as it unfolds, intelligent, responsive, and quietly aligned. 7. Emotions are gateways, not enemies. There was a time when I believed that awakening meant feeling better all the time, calmer, lighter, untouched by waves of sadness, anger, or fear. And I carried that belief quietly while judging myself every time a difficult emotion surfaced, thinking it was proof that I had failed to grow or understand something essential. What I eventually discovered, through exhaustion rather than insight, is that avoiding emotion is not a sign of consciousness but a subtle form of self-rejection, because every emotion that arises is part of the human experience, asking to be included rather than eliminated. Avoiding emotions is, in truth, avoiding yourself, because emotions are not interruptions to life but expressions of life moving through a nervous system shaped by memory, meaning, and survival. When you push them away, suppress them, or label them as obstacles to peace, you are unconsciously sending the message that parts of you are not welcome, and the system responds by tightening, not relaxing. This tightening is what many people mistake for spiritual discipline, when in fact it is only another layer of control that eventually leads to numbness or burnout. Every emotion, no matter how uncomfortable, carries a simple intention that is often misunderstood, because emotions are not here to harm you or define you, but to be felt, acknowledged, and allowed to complete their natural cycle. An emotion that is seen does not need to shout, and an emotion that is allowed does not need to stay. But an emotion that is resisted will linger, returning in different forms until it is finally met with presence rather than strategy. I learned this not from books, but from sitting with grief I could no longer outrun, from anxiety that refused to be fixed by positive thinking, and from a quiet sadness that only softened when I stopped asking it to leave. In those moments, something surprising happened, because instead of becoming overwhelmed, the simple act of staying created space. And in that space, the emotion began to loosen its grip, not because I changed it, but because I stopped fighting it. Consciousness is like light in this way, not dramatic or forceful, but steady and revealing. And just as darkness cannot survive sustained light, emotions cannot remain stuck when they are fully seen without judgment. This does not mean they disappear instantly, but they lose their sharpness, their urgency, and their power to define your identity. What remains is sensation moving through awareness, no longer personal, no longer threatening, simply energy completing a pattern. Many people believe they need to repair their emotions, regulate them perfectly, or transform them into something more acceptable, but this belief comes from the same misunderstanding that created the struggle in the first place. Because emotions do not need improvement, they need permission. When you allow an emotion to be exactly as it is, without commentary or resistance, the nervous system receives a signal of safety. And safety is what allows energy to move rather than freeze. You do not heal emotions by analyzing them endlessly or by replacing them with better thoughts, but by offering them the one thing they were never given in the past, which is space to exist without consequence. In that space, the body releases tension, the breath deepens naturally, and the mind stops bracing against an imagined threat. This is not something you force, but something that happens when you stop interfering. Being with an emotion does not mean indulging it or acting it out, but staying present while it moves, much like sitting beside a river without jumping into the current. You feel the movement, you notice the sensations, and you remain anchored in awareness rather than being carried away by the story attached to the feeling. Over time, this creates trust within yourself, because the system learns that no internal experience is too dangerous to be felt. This trust is what allows deeper layers to surface and release, layers that were formed long before you had language or choice, and that have been waiting patiently beneath coping strategies and spiritual ideals. When these layers are met with gentleness rather than urgency, they unwind naturally, not because you solved them, but because they were finally allowed to complete their expression. You do not need to correct your emotions to be conscious, and you do not need to rise above them to be free, because freedom is not found by escaping the human experience, but by inhabiting it fully, without resistance. When emotions are welcomed, they become guides rather than obstacles, pointing you toward areas of your life that need attention, rest, or truth, rather than spiritual bypassing. I have seen again and again that the moment someone stops trying to be calm and instead allows themselves to feel what is present, calmness emerges on its own, quiet and unforced. This calmness is not the absence of emotion, but the absence of internal conflict, and it feels grounded rather than elevated, simple rather than dramatic, and deeply honest. In this way, emotions become gateways, not to some mystical realm, but to deeper presence, embodiment, and authenticity. They lead you back into the body, into the moment, and into direct experience, which is where life actually happens. When you stop treating emotions as enemies, you stop living in opposition to yourself. And this reconciliation is one of the most profound shifts a human being can experience. You are not required to understand every emotion or trace it back to its origin, because awareness does not need explanation to function. It only needs openness. When you stay with an emotion long enough, without trying to name it or solve it, it often dissolves quietly, leaving behind a sense of space and relief that feels earned rather than imposed. This is the quiet power of presence, not glamorous or performative, but deeply effective, because it works with the intelligence of the body and the natural movement of energy rather than against it. And when you realize this, when you truly see that you never needed to fix your inner world to be whole, something inside you relaxes permanently, because the battle is over. Emotions were never the problem, and they never needed to be transcended, because they were always invitations to come home to yourself. When you answer that invitation with patience and honesty, what unfolds is not a dramatic awakening, but a steady return to wholeness, grounded in reality, softened by understanding, and sustained by the simple courage to feel what is already here. 8. You do not need to become better to be worthy. The belief that you must become better in order to be worthy is one of the quietest and most persistent sources of human suffering, because it disguises itself as motivation, self-improvement, and even spirituality, while slowly convincing you that who you are right now is somehow insufficient. Many people carry this belief without questioning it, assuming it is normal to feel that love, peace, respect, or even rest must be earned through effort, healing, or achievement. Yet this assumption places the nervous system in a constant state of striving, where life feels like an exam that never ends and acceptance always sits just one step beyond reach. When worthiness is tied to improvement, the mind never truly rests, because there is always another goal to reach, another habit to fix, another version of yourself to chase, and even moments of success feel temporary, fragile, and conditional. This creates a subtle background anxiety that follows people for decades, because the self is experienced as a project rather than a presence, something to be worked on rather than lived from. Over time, this belief erodes joy, not through dramatic pain, but through the quiet absence of ease, because it teaches you to delay your life until you feel good enough to inhabit it. Self-worth does not arise from achievement, recognition, or personal evolution, even though society repeatedly reinforces that idea through rewards, status, and comparison. Achievement can bring satisfaction, momentum, or comfort, but it cannot create intrinsic value, because value is not something added to a human being through performance, it is something that exists prior to any action. When you confuse achievement with worth, you become dependent on outcomes for your sense of self, and this dependency makes peace conditional and fragile, constantly vulnerable to failure, loss, or change. I have watched people reach goals they thought would finally make them feel enough, only to discover that the feeling lasted briefly before the old doubt returned in a new form, because the underlying belief had never been questioned. The mind simply moved the finish line, convincing them that the next level of growth would be the one that finally granted permission to relax. This cycle continues until exhaustion forces a deeper inquiry, because striving can only sustain itself for so long before the body and heart demand something more honest. Worthiness is not something you achieve, remember, or reclaim through effort, because it was never lost in the first place. It is inherent, not earned, woven into existence itself, much like the value of a tree that does not increase because it grows taller, or decrease because it loses leaves. A tree does not justify its presence, and neither do you. Yet the human mind has learned to measure itself constantly, mistaking usefulness for value and productivity for love. When you see this clearly, something loosens inside you, because you realize that nothing essential about you has ever been missing. The moment you stop trying to prove your worth, life shifts from performance to participation, because energy that was previously spent on self-justification becomes available for living. You begin to speak more honestly, rest more deeply, and choose more intuitively, not because you have improved, but because you are no longer negotiating your right to exist. This shift does not make you passive or indifferent, but grounded, because action now arises from clarity rather than insecurity, and movement feels natural rather than forced. When you no longer need to prove yourself, you begin to live, not as an idea of who you should be, but as who you already are, present and responsive to life as it unfolds. Decisions become simpler, relationships become cleaner, and effort becomes proportionate rather than compulsive, because the underlying fear of not being enough is no longer driving behavior. You still grow, learn, and evolve, but growth is no longer a requirement for self-acceptance. It is a byproduct of curiosity and engagement. Love, in its truest form, has never been conditional, even though many of us learn to associate it with approval, performance, or compliance. True love does not ask you to become something else first, because it recognizes value before improvement, not after it. When you internalize this understanding, the way you relate to yourself softens, and that softness naturally extends outward, changing how you relate to others without effort or strategy. This is not an abstract idea, but a lived shift that alters the texture of everyday experience. Because when worthiness is no longer in question, the body relaxes, the breath deepens, and attention returns to the present moment. You stop postponing peace, waiting for a future version of yourself to arrive, and you begin meeting life as it is, with the quiet confidence that nothing essential needs to be fixed before you can belong here. You were never meant to earn your place in existence, and the moment you stop trying to become better in order to deserve life, you discover that life has been waiting for you all along, not at the finish line, but right here, exactly as you are. 9. Signs you are returning. One of the quiet misunderstandings about awakening is the belief that it should look dramatic from the outside, filled with certainty, constant clarity, or a visible sense of being above life's ordinary challenges. Yet the truth is far simpler and far more intimate, because returning to yourself does not announce itself loudly. It reveals itself through subtle shifts in how you meet each moment. These shifts are easy to overlook because they do not inflate the ego or create a new identity, but they gently dissolve the tension that once shaped your inner world. You begin to notice that you react less and observe more, not because you are suppressing emotion or trying to be calm, but because there is suddenly a small space between what happens and how you respond. In that space, awareness steps in naturally, and instead of being immediately pulled into old patterns of defense or explanation, you find yourself watching thoughts and feelings arise without being compelled to act on them. This is not detachment or indifference, but a grounded presence that allows experience to move through you without hijacking your nervous system. As this presence stabilizes, peace begins to appear without a reason, which can feel unfamiliar at first because the mind is conditioned to associate peace with solved problems, favorable outcomes, or moments of success. When peace arrives without explanation, the mind may even search for a justification, wondering what has been fixed or accomplished. Yet nothing has changed externally. What has changed is your relationship to experience, because peace is no longer something you chase. It is something you uncover beneath the noise of constant interpretation. You also find that the urgency to understand everything starts to fade, because you realize that understanding is not always necessary for peace. There was a time when not knowing felt threatening, when unanswered questions created anxiety and demanded immediate resolution. But as you return to yourself, you become more comfortable with uncertainty. You see that life does not require complete comprehension to be lived fully, and this realization brings a deep sense of relief, as if you have been carrying a weight that you are finally allowed to set down. In this state, you begin to feel enough in the present moment, not as a conclusion you reach through logic, but as a quiet recognition that nothing essential is missing right now. This feeling does not depend on circumstances aligning perfectly or on emotions being consistently positive, but arises from the absence of internal conflict. You stop arguing with reality, and in that absence of resistance, a natural sense of sufficiency emerges, steady and unremarkable, yet profoundly stabilizing. Another sign of returning is a gentler relationship with yourself, where self-criticism loses its authority and compassion becomes the default response to difficulty. This does not mean you never notice habits or patterns that cause pain, but you approach them with curiosity rather than judgment, understanding that harshness has never produced lasting change. You begin to treat yourself as someone learning, not failing, and this shift alone changes the emotional tone of your inner world. As you become gentler, your pace naturally slows, not out of laziness or avoidance, but because urgency is no longer fueling your decisions. You move when movement is needed, and rest when rest is appropriate, listening more closely to signals from the body and intuition rather than pushing through discomfort to meet internal or external expectations. This rhythm feels more aligned, less exhausting, and surprisingly efficient because energy is no longer wasted on resistance or self-coercion. You may also notice that your need for validation diminishes because approval from others no longer determines your sense of self. This does not make you distant or closed, but more authentic, because you speak and act from a place of clarity rather than from a desire to be seen a certain way. When validation comes, it is appreciated, and when it does not, it no longer destabilizes you, because your sense of worth is no longer negotiated externally. In conversations and relationships, you find yourself listening more deeply, not preparing responses or defending positions, but genuinely present with what is being shared. This presence changes the quality of connection because people feel seen without being analyzed or fixed. You are no longer trying to manage how you are perceived, and this transparency creates a quiet trust that does not rely on performance or agreement. Emotionally, you become more resilient, not because emotions disappear, but because they move through you more freely. You recognize feelings as temporary states rather than permanent truths, and this recognition allows you to experience them fully without fear of being consumed. Sadness comes and goes, joy arises and fades, and through it all, there is an underlying steadiness that remains untouched, quietly holding the entire spectrum of experience. You may also notice a shift in how you relate to time, where the constant pressure to arrive somewhere else begins to dissolve. The future no longer feels like a destination where fulfillment waits, and the past no longer defines your identity with the same intensity. Attention naturally returns to what is happening now, and this return brings a sense of aliveness that cannot be planned or repeated, only experienced. Another subtle sign is the loss of interest in spiritual comparison, where you stop measuring your progress against others or questioning whether you are doing it right. You realize that returning to yourself is not a competition or a linear path, but a deeply personal unfolding that cannot be standardized. This realization frees you from the need to constantly evaluate your state, allowing presence to deepen naturally without interference. You also begin to trust simplicity, noticing that the most profound moments often arise in ordinary experiences rather than extraordinary events. A quiet morning, a shared meal, or a moment of stillness becomes rich and complete because you are no longer searching for meaning elsewhere. Meaning reveals itself through direct experience, unfiltered by expectation or ambition. As this returning continues, you become less identified with your thoughts, recognizing them as patterns rather than commands. You still think, plan, and reflect, but thoughts no longer define your reality or dictate your worth. They pass through awareness like weather through the sky, noticed but not followed compulsively, and this creates a spaciousness that feels both grounding and liberating. Perhaps the most telling sign of all is that you stop trying to name the experience, because the need to label, explain, or frame your state fades. You are no longer trying to prove that something has changed, because the change is lived rather than conceptual. Life feels less like a project and more like a participation, where each moment is met with openness rather than expectation. Returning to yourself does not remove challenges or guarantee comfort, but it changes how challenges are held, because they are no longer interpreted as personal failures or spiritual setbacks. They are seen as movements within life, not judgments on your worth or progress. This perspective brings a quiet confidence that does not depend on certainty, but on trust in your ability to meet whatever arises with presence and honesty. These signs are not milestones to achieve or boxes to check, but gentle indicators that you are no longer moving away from yourself. They suggest that effort is giving way to allowance, that control is softening into trust, and that the search for something more is slowly resolving into the recognition of what has always been here. In this recognition, there is no dramatic ending or final arrival, only a steady settling into reality, where life is lived from the inside out, simple, sincere, and deeply human. 10. Awakening does not make you special, it makes you real. One of the most liberating truths I have come to understand is that awakening does not elevate you above life, other people, or the human experience itself. Because the moment awakening becomes a way to feel special, it quietly turns into another disguise of the ego. Many people enter the spiritual path hoping, often unconsciously, that awakening will finally separate them from pain, confusion, or ordinariness. Yet what actually happens, when awakening is genuine, is almost the opposite of what the mind imagines. Because instead of becoming extraordinary, you become deeply, unmistakably real. You do not turn into a higher being floating above everyday concerns, nor do you acquire a constant sense of certainty or moral superiority, but you find yourself standing more fully inside your own humanity, feeling it without resistance or shame. Awakening strips away the need to appear enlightened, healed, or resolved, and what remains is a human being who is present, responsive, and honest about what is happening within them. This honesty is not dramatic or performative, but grounded and quiet, because it does not seek validation. Becoming real means you allow yourself to be touched by life again, not selectively, but completely, feeling joy without clinging to it, and feeling sorrow without turning it into an identity. You stop using spirituality as a way to avoid discomfort, and instead, you meet discomfort with presence, recognizing it as part of the shared human condition rather than a personal failure. In this way, awakening does not remove vulnerability, but it removes the fear of vulnerability, which is what allows you to live with openness rather than armor. You begin to notice that presence shows up most clearly in the simplest moments, because awakening does not pull you away from ordinary life. It anchors you more deeply into it. You find yourself fully present while drinking a cup of coffee, listening to a friend, or walking quietly through your day, not because you are practicing mindfulness, but because attention naturally rests where life is unfolding. These moments do not feel spiritual in the way the mind once imagined, yet they carry a depth and richness that no peak experience can replace. There is a subtle shift where you no longer feel the need to escape life or chase it, because both avoidance and pursuit are rooted in resistance to what is. When you stop running from discomfort and stop chasing fulfillment, you discover a middle ground where life meets you exactly where you are. In this space, you participate fully without being consumed, and you rest without withdrawing, creating a rhythm that feels sustainable and honest. Living more deeply does not mean feeling more intensely all the time, but feeling more accurately, because emotions are no longer filtered through layers of denial, expectation, or self-judgment. You feel what is present without exaggeration or suppression, and this balanced sensitivity allows you to respond wisely rather than react habitually. Depth, in this sense, is not intensity, but intimacy with experience as it is. As awakening matures, life naturally slows down, not because you force yourself to move less, but because urgency no longer drives your choices. You begin to sense when action is necessary and when waiting is appropriate, and you trust these signals without overthinking them. This slower pace is not passive or disengaged, but attentive, allowing you to notice nuances that were previously missed when the mind was always rushing toward the next outcome. Being more present does not mean you withdraw from responsibilities or ambitions, but that you engage with them differently, without tying your identity to success or failure. Work becomes something you do rather than something you are, and relationships become places of connection rather than arenas for validation. This shift brings a sense of freedom that does not require changing circumstances, only changing the way you inhabit them. You also become more compassionate, not as a virtue you try to embody, but as a natural response that arises when you no longer see yourself as separate or superior, when you recognize your own fears, doubts, and contradictions without judgment. It becomes easier to recognize them in others, and compassion flows without effort or obligation. This compassion is not sentimental or indulgent, but grounded in realism, understanding that everyone is navigating life with the tools they have. Awakening removes the need to maintain a spiritual image, because authenticity becomes more important than appearing evolved. You allow yourself to be uncertain, imperfect, and unfinished, understanding that completeness does not come from having all the answers, but from being fully present with the questions. This humility is not self-deprecating, but freeing, because it releases the pressure to be anything other than what you are in each moment. You may notice that conversations become simpler, more honest, and less performative, because you are no longer trying to convey depth or insight, but simply responding to what is being shared. Silence becomes comfortable, not awkward, and listening becomes more natural than speaking. In these exchanges, connection feels more real, because it is no longer mediated by roles or expectations. Living more slowly and deeply also means that you become more sensitive to your own limits, honoring the need for rest, boundaries, and solitude without guilt. You recognize that pushing beyond capacity is not a sign of dedication, but a misunderstanding of your own nature. By respecting these limits, you preserve energy for what truly matters, allowing life to unfold without constant depletion. You do not become immune to pain or loss, but you meet them without the additional suffering of resistance or self-blame. Pain is felt as pain, not as a verdict on your spiritual progress or personal worth. This clarity allows grief, disappointment, and uncertainty to move through you without hardening into bitterness or despair, because they are held within a larger context of presence and acceptance. Perhaps the most profound change is that life no longer feels like something happening to you or something you must conquer, but something you are participating in, moment by moment. You stop waiting for a final awakening or a permanent state, and instead, you live in the immediacy of experience, trusting that presence is enough. This trust is not blind optimism, but a grounded confidence born from seeing that you can meet life as it is, again and again. Awakening, in the end, does not separate you from others or from the world, but returns you to a shared reality where you belong without effort. It does not give you a higher identity, but dissolves the need for one, leaving you free to be human without apology. You become less concerned with becoming someone else and more interested in being here, fully and honestly. When awakening is understood this way, it loses its glamour and gains its depth, because it is no longer about transformation into something extraordinary, but about the courage to be ordinary without resistance. In that ordinariness, you find a profound richness, because life no longer needs to be impressive to be meaningful. It only needs to be met. This is what it means to be real, not elevated, not perfected, but present, responsive, and alive. You live more slowly because you are no longer chasing an imagined future, more deeply because you are no longer skimming the surface of experience, and more fully because you are finally here. And in this simplicity, you discover that awakening was never about becoming special, but about coming home to the truth of who you have always been. Coming home. Awakening was never a journey that asked you to travel far, collect identities, or become someone unfamiliar to yourself, even though it may have felt that way at times when searching seemed necessary for survival. What you have been moving through was not distance, but forgetting, not because you failed or were distracted, but because forgetting was part of learning how to be human in a world that taught you to look outward before inward. When this is seen clearly, something tender settles in the chest, because you realize that nothing essential ever went wrong. You were never lost in the way the mind fears being lost, because loss implies separation, and separation was never real. What happened instead was a gradual turning away from the quiet, knowing that was always present beneath thought, effort, and identity. Life asked you to play roles, to adapt, to protect yourself, and you did what was needed to belong and survive, not knowing that one day you would feel the call to return, not to a place, but to a way of being. This return does not require dramatic change or a final understanding, because it is already happening in this moment if you are willing to pause long enough to notice. Right now, without fixing anything, without becoming calmer or wiser, there is already an awareness reading these words, breathing, sensing, and being present. That awareness does not need improvement, because it is not a thing that can be upgraded. It is the space in which all experience unfolds. In this moment, you are already enough, not as a concept to repeat or a belief to convince yourself of, but as a living reality that reveals itself when striving softens. Enough does not mean perfect or complete in the way the mind imagines, but whole in the sense that nothing essential is missing. The feeling of lack came from believing you needed to add something to be worthy of peace, and that belief is what is slowly dissolving as you return. You do not need to gather more knowledge, achieve more insight, or resolve every part of your past before you are allowed to rest. Because rest is not a reward for progress, it is the natural state that becomes available when resistance ends. The search for something more was never wrong, but it was never meant to last forever. And its ending does not come through success, but through recognition. Remembering is not an act of effort, but a gentle shift of attention, a willingness to stop running toward an imagined future and notice what has been quietly holding you all along. When you remember, you do not suddenly become someone new, but you recognize what has always been here beneath every attempt to change yourself. This remembering feels simple, almost too simple for the mind that expected something grand, yet it carries a depth that effort could never reach. As remembering deepens, life does not disappear or become distant, but becomes more intimate, because you are no longer relating to it through layers of expectation and fear. You meet each experience more directly, whether it is joy or discomfort, success or uncertainty. And this directness brings a sense of aliveness that does not depend on conditions. Life feels less like a problem to solve and more like a movement to participate in. You may notice that you stop asking whether you are doing it right, because the need for reassurance fades when presence becomes familiar. There is a quiet trust that begins to form, not in outcomes or beliefs, but in your ability to meet whatever arises with honesty and awareness. This trust does not promise ease, but it offers stability, a grounded sense that you can be here without abandoning yourself. Coming home does not remove challenges, relationships, or responsibilities, but it changes how they are held, because they are no longer used as measures of worth or progress. You engage with life fully, yet without the weight of proving yourself. And this freedom allows you to move with greater clarity and compassion. You still care, but you no longer cling, and you still act, but without the urgency that once drained you. There is a tenderness that emerges when you realize how long you have been trying to arrive somewhere you already were. And this tenderness is not regret, but understanding. You see that every step, even the painful ones, was part of learning how to recognize yourself again. Nothing was wasted, because everything contributed to the moment when effort finally gave way to remembrance. You begin to treat yourself differently, not because you learned a new rule, but because you no longer believe you are broken. This shift is subtle, yet it changes everything, because when you stop seeing yourself as a problem, life stops feeling like a test. You allow yourself to be human without apology, present without performance, and this permission brings a quiet relief that words rarely capture. As you rest more deeply in this recognition, you may notice that stillness becomes accessible even in the midst of activity, because stillness is no longer something you seek, but something you notice. It is present in pauses between thoughts, in moments of breath, and in the simple awareness of being here. This stillness does not isolate you from the world, but connects you to it more intimately, because it is the ground from which all experience arises. You do not need to hold on to this understanding or protect it, because it is not fragile, and it does not depend on constant attention. It will return again and again, especially when you stop trying to maintain it, because it is not a state you enter, but a truth you recognize. When it seems to fade, that fading is simply another invitation to remember, not a failure. Coming home means you stop waiting for permission to live, to rest, to love, and to be present. You realize that permission was never withheld, only postponed by a belief that you had to become something else first. When that belief loosens, life opens in quiet, ordinary ways, and you find yourself participating rather than postponing. In this homecoming, there is no finish line or final moment of arrival, because being here is not an achievement. It is a continuous unfolding. Each moment offers the opportunity to remember again, gently and without pressure. Some moments will be clear, others will be confusing, but none of them require you to leave yourself to be met fully. When you remember, you recognize that you never left yourself, even in the moments when you felt most disconnected or lost. Awareness was always present, quietly witnessing every thought, every emotion, every attempt to find your way. This witnessing did not judge or abandon you, and it does not ask anything from you now except willingness to notice. This is what coming home truly means, not returning to a past version of yourself, but settling into the truth that has been constant through every change. You do not need to search for it, defend it, or explain it, because it is already living you. In recognizing this, something softens permanently, because the journey that once felt endless reveals itself as complete. You are here, now, and that is enough. There is nothing to add, nothing to fix, and nothing to become before this moment can be lived fully. Remembering does not take you away from life, it returns you to it, grounded, honest, and present. And when you remember, not as an idea but as a lived reality, you see clearly that you were never separate from yourself, not for a single moment. The search ends not because you found something new, but because you recognized what was always here, quietly waiting for you to come home.